It all started with an ordinary night, the kind where you stare at your phone just to distract yourself from the day that slipped away without much meaning. I was scrolling through social media, half bored and half curious about what people from my past were doing these days. The usual pictures popped up: vacation selfies, kids holding trophies, couples showing off meals at five-star restaurants they probably couldn't afford. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, but my thumb froze when I saw a photo shared by someone in our mutual circle, an old friend from college. The caption was something about a weekend retreat to Napa Valley. At first, I wasn't even sure why it caught my eye. But then, there she was, Emily, my wife of 12 years. She was in the background, sitting on a terrace overlooking a vineyard, wine glass in hand, her head tilted slightly as she laughed at something the man beside her had said. The man was Colin, my business partner. They didn't look suspicious. To anyone else, it was just a casual shot. But I knew Emily hadn't gone to Napa. She'd told me she was visiting her mother that weekend. The suitcase she packed had sweaters and family photo albums, things you wouldn't bring to a place like this. I had helped her load the trunk of her car myself. I zoomed in, as if the closer I got, the more sense it would make. Emily was wearing the blue dress I had bought her for our anniversary. The one she swore made her feel beautiful but comfortable. It wasn't a dress you'd wear to sit at your mom's kitchen table. It was a dress you wore when you wanted to be noticed. I checked the date on the photo. 3 days ago. That was the day she said her mother wasn't feeling well and needed help around the house. She'd texted me updates throughout the weekend about cooking soup, watching an old movie, and how her mom was doing better. Now, those messages felt like nothing more than carefully constructed lines from a script. I closed the app and opened it again, hoping I had misread something. Maybe it was an old picture reposted by someone who got the date wrong. But no matter how I looked at it, there was no escaping what it meant. The room around me felt suddenly colder, even though the heater was humming. I stood up, paced a little, and tried to piece together what I was seeing. My brain kept offering reasons, innocent ones, excuses to make this whole thing a misunderstanding. Maybe she ran into Colin by chance. Maybe this was a work-related trip she forgot to mention. Maybe I was overreacting, but deep down I knew better. I sat back down and stared at the photo again. Colin leaned in toward her, his posture relaxed, the way men get when they're too comfortable with someone. I had known Colin for 7 years, built a business with him from the ground up. We weren't just partners, we were supposed to be friends. But this wasn't the posture of a man talking business. It wasn't even the posture of a man having a friendly conversation. There was something familiar in the way he was looking at her, something I hadn't seen before. I locked my phone and tossed it on the couch beside me. My mind was racing now, connecting dots I didn't even know were there until this moment. Little things started surfacing, like how Emily had been taking longer to get ready in the mornings, or how she'd started texting more at night, her screen tilted just slightly away from my view. Or the time Colin suggested we cut back on our weekend meetings because he needed more time for himself. I thought I was imagining things then. Now, I wasn't so sure. The noise of the outside world faded, and all I could hear was my own breathing. I didn't know what to do next, but one thing was clear: I needed answers. Not tomorrow, not later. Now. And the first person I needed those answers from wasn't Emily. It was Colin. I didn't bother calling Colin. He'd either lie, dodge, or come up with something rehearsed that would only add to the mess already spinning in my head. No, I needed to see him face to face. I needed to watch his reaction when I brought it up. I threw on my jacket and grabbed my keys, my phone still buzzing with notifications from work, family chats, and useless promotions I didn't care about. Everything felt muted, like none of it mattered right now. The only thing that did was figuring out whether this whole world I'd built for myself was about to collapse. Colin's house wasn't far. He lived in the kind of upscale neighborhood that screams, "I've made it," with manicured lawns, spotless driveways, and fences meant to keep the outside world at bay. I parked 2 houses down, giving myself a moment to breathe. The street was quiet except for the distant hum of a passing car. I was tempted to sit there longer, but waiting wasn't going to give me the answers I needed. I walked up his driveway, my footsteps heavier than they needed to be. His porch light was on, casting a faint glow over the neatly arranged flower pots his girlfriend probably picked out. As I knocked on the door, I wondered how many times Emily had been here without me knowing. Colin opened the door, his face lighting up with that same familiar grin he always used when we closed a good deal. But tonight it made my stomach twist. "Hey, man," he said, stepping aside to let me in without question. "Didn't expect you to drop by this late. Everything okay?" I walked past him into the living room, where the scent of fresh coffee lingered. His laptop was open on the coffee table, a spreadsheet glowing on the screen. The scene was too normal. It made everything worse. I didn't sit. I stood there, arms crossed, watching him close the laptop and lean against the couch like he had all the time in the world. "I saw a picture today," I said, keeping my voice steady, "of you and Emily. In Napa." Colin blinked, but his expression barely changed. He was good, too good. He chuckled softly, as if I had just told him a joke he didn't quite understand. "Napa? Oh yeah, we ran into each other there. Total coincidence. Small world, huh?" I stared at him, waiting for the crack in his armor. "She never told me she was going to Napa. That did it." His grin faded, replaced by something more guarded. He shifted his weight, scratching the back of his neck like he was searching for the right thing to say. "Look, I didn't think it was a big deal," he said, his voice a little too casual. "I assumed you knew. We didn't plan anything." "She said she was visiting her mom, right?" I could feel my pulse in my ears. He was scrambling, trying to patch the cracks with vague excuses, but I wasn't buying it. I took a step closer, and for the first time in all the years I'd known him, I saw him flinch. "You've been lying to me, haven't you?" I said. It wasn't a question. Colin sighed, rubbing his face like he was suddenly exhausted. "Look, I don't know what you think happened, but you don't know what I think." I cut him off. "I think you've been sleeping with my wife, Colin. I think you've been doing it behind my back while we've been building a business together, like none of this would ever come out." He didn't deny it. That was the moment everything I had feared became real. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he said, finally dropping the pretense. "It wasn't supposed to be serious. I didn't want to hurt you." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You didn't want to hurt me? Colin, you've destroyed everything. You've taken the one person I thought I could trust and turned her into a stranger." His eyes shifted to the floor, as if he couldn't face the weight of what he'd done. "I'm sorry, Mum." "Don't," I said, my voice cold. "Don't apologize like it fixes this." I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me before he could say anything else. My chest felt like it was on fire, but my mind was already ahead of me, racing toward what I had to do next. I couldn't confront Emily yet, not until I processed this. But there was one thing I knew. I couldn't let this betrayal sit quietly in the background. The only question now was how deep Emily's lies went, and how far I was willing to go to uncover the truth. I drove aimlessly for a while, the city's glow fading into the shadows of empty streets and late-night gas stations. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than they should have, like the pressure would somehow hold me together. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just knew I wasn't ready to go home yet. Not to the place where her scent still lingered on the pillows and her laughter echoed in my head. I pulled into a parking lot outside a 24-hour diner. The neon sign buzzed faintly, casting an electric hum into the night air. I wasn't hungry, but I needed a place where I wouldn't feel like the walls were closing in on me. I ordered a coffee I wouldn't drink and stared at the black liquid swirling in the cup. My phone vibrated in my pocket, and for a moment, I thought it might be Emily. Maybe she had sensed something, felt the shift in the air, and was about to confess everything. But it wasn't her. Just a work email reminding me about a meeting with a client I didn't care about right now. I ignored it and scrolled back through her text messages, reading them again with new eyes. The ones from that weekend suddenly felt like puzzle pieces that had been deliberately placed out of order. "Mom's feeling a bit better today. Just made her some tea, and now we're watching an old classic. It's been nice spending time with her. We don't do this enough." The lies weren't loud. They were subtle, wrapped in the kind of details that made them believable. She had mastered the art of weaving fiction into reality without skipping a beat. That realization burned more than I expected. It wasn't just the cheating, it was the ease with which she had built this second life, as if deceiving me had become second nature. I thought back to the photo, the way she leaned into Colin, the way he looked at her like she was the only thing that mattered. How long had this been going on? A month? A year? I had no idea. But the thought of them together, laughing over wine and sharing secrets while I was left in the dark, made my stomach turn. I pulled up her social media account and scrolled through her recent posts. They were filled with the usual. Pictures of us at family gatherings, her favorite books, sunsets she always captured with too many filters. But then I saw it. An old post from 3 months ago, buried under layers of everyday life. It was a photo of her at a work event, standing next to Colin. She wore the same smile she always gave me, but now it looked different. Forced. Staged. Like she was playing a role she didn't believe in anymore. The caption read, "Great night with an amazing team." I remember that night. She came home late, claiming the event had gone longer than expected. I had asked if everything went okay, and she had kissed me on the cheek, saying she was just tired. It had seemed innocent then, but now it felt like the start of something sinister, like the first lie in a chain of many. The waitress refilled my coffee without asking, her presence barely registering as I pieced together the web Emily had spun. She hadn't just lied about Napa. There were other weekends she had gone to visit friends, other nights when she worked late and didn't want to wake me up when she got home. I leaned back in the booth, my thoughts swirling faster than I could untangle them. How many nights had I been lying next to her, thinking we were fine, while she was probably texting Colin under the covers? The anger returned, hot and suffocating. I couldn't believe how blind I had been, how easily I had accepted her excuses without question. But what hurt the most was knowing that she had chosen Colin, of all people, the man I had trusted with not just my business, but my life. I picked up my phone and considered calling her, but what would I say? The confrontation needed to happen face to face. I wanted to see her reaction when I asked her why she did this, why she threw everything away for a man who didn't deserve her, or me. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't care. I had made up my mind. Tonight wasn't just about finding out how deep the betrayal went. It was about making her face it, making her admit what she'd done without any room to wiggle free. I paid the bill and walked out into the night, the cold air biting at my skin. As I slid back into the driver's seat, I knew that once this confrontation happened, there would be no turning back. Whatever she said, whatever excuses or apologies she tried to offer, this would change everything. The house was waiting for me, but so was the truth. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure which one I dreaded more. The driveway was empty when I pulled in, which meant Emily hadn't come home yet. The house looked the same as always, porch light on, blinds drawn, the faint glow of the kitchen light spilling through the window. But it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a stage where the final act of this twisted play was about to unfold. I sat in the car for a few minutes, gripping the steering like it might anchor me to reality. What was I supposed to say when she walked through that door? "Hey, honey, how was your weekend with Colin?" The thought made me sick. No, I wasn't going to sugarcoat it. I'd ask her directly, and she wouldn't be able to dodge it. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway snapped me out of my thoughts. Her headlights lit up the front porch as she parked beside me. For a moment, I just watched her, wondering if she felt even a shred of guilt as she gathered her things and stepped out of the car. She looked the same as she always did, confident, put together, like the woman I had fallen in love with years ago. But now, that image was cracked, and I couldn't see her the same way anymore. The door opened, and she stepped inside, humming softly to herself as she set her purse on the counter. She hadn't noticed me yet. I closed the door behind me, and the sound made her turn. "Oh," she said, surprised. "I didn't know you'd be up." I studied her, searching for signs of anything out of place. But she was good. Too good. She smiled like nothing had changed, like she hadn't just spent the weekend lying to my face. "I couldn't sleep," I said, my voice steady but cold. She walked over and kissed me on the cheek, the same routine we'd done 1,000 times before. But this time, I didn't lean into it. I stepped back, and her smile faltered for just a second, just long enough for me to see the cracks underneath. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice soft, concerned. She was playing her role perfectly. "I saw a picture today," I said, watching her closely. "From Napa." Her body stiffened, barely noticeable, but enough to confirm what I already knew. She set her keys down slowly, like she needed time to think. What picture? One of you and Colin. At a vineyard. You were supposed to be with your mom that weekend, remember? She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her eyes flickered toward the floor, then back to me, searching for a way out. I can explain, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Explain what? I asked, taking a step closer. That you lied to me? That you've been sneaking around with my business partner while I sat here, thinking we were fine? Her face crumpled, but I didn't care. The sympathy that might have softened me in the past was gone. I wasn't here to comfort her. I was here for the truth. I didn't mean for this to happen, she said, her voice cracking. It just, don't. I interrupted. Don't tell me it just happened. Affairs don't just happen, Emily. You made a choice. Over and over again. Tears welled up in her eyes, but they didn't move me. She wasn't crying for what she'd done. She was crying because she got caught. How long? I asked. She wiped her eyes, her hands trembling. 6 months. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of her coming home to me while another man occupied her thoughts. The weight of it hit me like a punch to the gut, but I didn't let it show. I couldn't afford a breakdown now. Why? The words slipped out before I could stop it. I hated that I cared, but I needed to know. What did I do that made you run to him? She shook her head, more tears falling. It wasn't you. It wasn't anything you did. I don't know how it happened. I didn't plan it. Colin and we connected, and then things got out of control. Out of control? I laughed bitterly. That's what you call it. I never meant to hurt you, she said, stepping closer. I swear I didn't want this. But you wanted him. She didn't answer. Her silence was louder than anything she could have said. I turned away, the walls of the house suffocating me. Everything in this room, the pictures on the wall, the furniture we picked out together, felt like a reminder of how blind I had been. I can leave if you want, she said quietly. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She knew the answer. Without another word, she grabbed her purse and headed for the door. I stood there, listening to her footsteps fade into the night, and when the door finally closed behind her, the silence that followed was deafening. I thought I'd feel relief when she left, but all I felt was a hollow ache in the center of my chest. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of whatever came next. But for now, I was alone in a house that no longer felt like mine, surrounded by memories that had lost their meaning. The house felt too big without her. The silence pressed against my ears, making every creak of the floor and hum of the refrigerator sound louder than they should. I walked through the living room, staring at the things she left behind. Her favorite throw blanket draped over the couch, the mug she always used still sitting by the sink. I knew I should have packed it all up, thrown her things into boxes like they meant nothing, but my body wouldn't move. Instead, I sat on the edge of the couch and stared at the blank TV screen, my mind replaying her confession on a loop. 6 months. It echoed like a broken record, each repetition adding another layer of disbelief. I thought back to when it might have started. Was it at that work event? The one where she wore the black dress and told me Colin had been so helpful in dealing with some difficult clients? Or maybe it was the night she came home late from dinner with coworkers and fell asleep before I could ask how it went. The signs had been there, scattered like breadcrumbs, but I had ignored them, chalking it up to the demands of life and work. I hated how much of my life had been intertwined with Colin's. We built the business from nothing, working late nights in rented office spaces, splitting the wins and losses like brothers. I trusted him in ways I didn't trust most people. Now, that trust felt like a cruel joke, and I couldn't decide who I hated more, him or her. I stood up, restless, and wandered into the bedroom. The sheets on her side of the bed were still slightly rumpled, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the fabric. I pulled them off, balled them up, and threw them into the laundry basket. But even that didn't feel like enough to erase her presence. The closet door creaked as I opened it. Her clothes hung neatly in rows, untouched by the chaos she had caused. I ran my fingers over the fabrics, silk blouses, cozy sweaters, dresses she'd worn on date nights I thought meant something. Now, they felt like costumes from a play I didn't know I was part of. In the back corner of the closet, I found a shoebox where she kept old photos and sentimental keepsakes. I pulled it down and sat cross-legged on the floor, hesitating before opening it. Inside were pictures of us from vacations, birthday cards, and little notes she'd left me over the years. "Thinking of you," one note said in her neat handwriting, tucked next to a photo of us at the beach. I almost laughed at the irony. I shuffled through the photos until I found one of her and Colin. It wasn't from the recent trip to Napa. This one was older, taken at a company event I barely remembered. They were standing side by side, smiling like everything was normal. But now, even the smallest details felt like clues I had missed. The way her hand rested lightly on his arm, the way he leaned just a little too close. I tossed the photo back into the box and shoved it away. None of it mattered anymore. The past was poisoned, and no amount of analyzing it would change what had happened. But as much as I wanted to move forward, I couldn't ignore the knot of resentment tightening in my chest. It wasn't just about the affair. It was about the way they had both betrayed me in plain sight, trusting that I'd never figure it out. Colin had smiled in my face, toasted our successes, and shaken my hand, all while stealing the life I thought I had. I couldn't let it go. I got up and grabbed my phone. My fingers hovered over Emily's name, but I didn't call her. What was the point? She had already admitted it, already walked out the door like leaving me was the easiest decision she'd ever made. No, she wasn't the one I needed to deal with right now. I scrolled until I found Colin's contact and stared at the screen. Part of me wanted to call him and unleash everything I was feeling, but I knew that wasn't how this would end. I wasn't looking for apologies or explanations. I wanted something else, something he wouldn't see coming. I didn't hit call. Not yet. I needed a plan, something that would make him understand exactly what it felt like to have the rug ripped out from under him. This wasn't going to be a heated argument or a fist fight in a parking lot. It was going to be calculated, precise, and personal. I dropped the phone onto the nightstand and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The house was still too quiet, but now the silence didn't bother me as much. It gave me space to think, to plot. Emily had chosen her side. Colin had made his choices too. And soon, they'd both find out what it felt like to lose everything. I woke up the next morning with a strange sense of clarity, the kind that only comes after a night spent simmering in resentment and unfinished thoughts. Emily was gone. Colin had betrayed me, and the life I thought I had was already crumbling. But that didn't mean I had to let it collapse without a fight. If they were going to tear apart my world, I was going to make sure theirs burned right alongside it. I grabbed my phone and started scrolling through emails and messages from work. Most of them were routine updates about clients, deadlines, and upcoming meetings. But buried between them was something I hadn't noticed before, an email from Colin sent 2 weeks ago about a potential investment opportunity. I opened it and read through the details. He had suggested expanding our business into a new market, one that promised high returns but carried significant risk. At the time, I trusted his judgment and agreed to let him handle the initial negotiations. Now that trust was gone, and I saw the email for what it really was, a potential weakness. I spent the next few hours digging through financial records, contracts, and any correspondence involving Colin and the investment. What I found didn't surprise me. He had positioned himself as the primary contact, ensuring that any deals made would go through him first. It wasn't outright betrayal on paper, but it was enough for me to see how easily he could manipulate the situation to benefit himself. I called our accountant, keeping the conversation casual. "Hey, I was reviewing some of our accounts," I said, "and I noticed a few things related to the new investment. Mind walking me through them?" The accountant was thorough, explaining how the funds were allocated and what Colin had already committed on behalf of the business. As he talked, my suspicions solidified. Colin had overextended us, putting more money into the project than we had agreed upon. If it failed, we'd be in serious trouble. I thanked the accountant and hung up, my mind racing with possibilities. This was my leverage. I could expose Colin's recklessness to our investors and clients, ruin his reputation, and make sure he took the fall for every bad decision he had made. But that wasn't enough. I needed something personal, something that would hit him where it hurt most. And I knew exactly what that was, his girlfriend, Claire. Claire and I'd always been friendly, but we weren't close. She was the kind of woman who kept to herself, showing up to company events with a polite smile and just enough small talk to be likable. But she had something Colin didn't, a moral compass. She believed in loyalty and honesty, two things Colin had tossed aside the moment he got involved with Emily. I scrolled through my contacts until I found her number and hesitated for only a moment before calling. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Claire, it's me," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I know this is a bit out of the blue, but can we meet? There's something I need to talk to you about. It's important." She sounded surprised, but agreed to meet at a nearby cafe. I didn't give her any details over the phone. This wasn't the kind of conversation you had through a screen. When I arrived, she was already waiting, a cup of coffee in front of her and a cautious look on her face. She waved me over, and I sat across from her, my heart pounding in my chest. "I'm guessing this isn't a social call," she said, stirring her coffee. "No, it's not," I admitted. "I wouldn't be here if it wasn't serious." She nodded, waiting for me to continue. I took a deep breath and laid it all out. The affair between Colin and Emily, the lies they had both told, and the financial risks Colin had taken without her knowledge. Her face went pale as I spoke, her hand trembling slightly as she set down her spoon. I had no idea," she whispered. I thought he loved me. I'm sorry you had to find out this way," I said, and for the first time that day, I meant it. But you deserve to know the truth." She wiped away a tear, her jaw tightening with determination. "What do you want me to do?" "I don't want to drag you into this any more than necessary," I said. "But if you're willing, I could use your help. Colin's made some bad decisions that could destroy the business, and I need someone on the inside who can confirm a few things." She didn't hesitate. "Tell me what you need." I leaned in, lowering my voice as I outlined the plan. With her help, I could gather the evidence I needed to expose Colin's financial mismanagement and his betrayal. Once I had everything, I'd confront him in front of the board and make sure there was no way for him to recover. As we left the cafe, I couldn't help but feel a surge of anticipation. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't just reacting, I was taking control. Colin thought he had one. He thought he could take what was mine without facing the consequences. But he was wrong, and by the time I was done, he'd know exactly what it felt like to lose everything. The boardroom was colder than usual, the air-conditioned hum creating a subtle tension as the members filed in, their voices low and their gazes curious. Colin sat at the head of the table, tapping his pen against a legal pad like it was just another ordinary meeting. But he didn't know what was coming. I took my seat directly across from him, and for the first time in weeks, I felt calm. Everything was in place. Claire had come through with the documents I needed. Proof of his reckless investments, the hidden accounts he hadn't disclosed, and even the emails where he reallocated company funds without permission. The door closed, and the meeting began. Colin launched into his usual spiel about quarterly profits and upcoming opportunities, his confidence filling the room like a fog. But I didn't hear most of it. I was waiting for my moment. When he finally paused, I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "Actually, before we move on, there's something I need to address," I said, keeping my voice steady. Colin's smile faltered just slightly, but he recovered quickly. "Of course. What's on your mind?" I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the folder containing everything: financial records, screenshots of emails, and evidence of his backdoor dealings. I spread them across the table, watching as the board members leaned in to get a closer look. "This," I said, tapping the documents, "is what's been happening behind the scenes while the rest of us thought we were running a legitimate business." Colin's face drained of color as he scanned the papers. "What is this?" he asked, his voice tighter now. "Proof," I replied. "Proof that you've been funneling company funds into risky investments without approval. Proof that you've been hiding losses and covering them up with inflated projections. And if you think this is the worst of it, you're wrong." I slid another page across the table. "Claire found this. It's an account under your name, tied to the funds you siphoned off for personal gain." He looked around the room, panic creeping into his eyes as he realized there was no way out. The board members murmured amongst themselves, their expressions a mix of shock and anger. "I trusted you," I said, my voice low but firm. "We all did. But you used that trust to line your pockets, and cover your tracks. And now, you're going to face the consequences. Colin stood abruptly, knocking over his chair. This is a setup, he said, his voice cracking. You don't understand the full picture. I can explain. You'll have plenty of time to explain when the auditors arrive, I said, cutting him off. I've already scheduled a full review of the company's finances. You'll be lucky if you're not facing criminal charges by the end of the month. The room went silent, except for the sound of Colin's heavy breathing. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. The same man who had smiled at me over drinks, who had stolen my wife and thought he'd get away with it, was now unraveling in front of me. You think this is about money? He said, his voice barely a whisper. This is about her, isn't it? You couldn't handle the fact that she chose me. The words stung, but I didn't let them show. No, Colin, this is about you destroying everything we built because you thought you were untouchable. But guess what? You're not. He grabbed his briefcase and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The room stayed silent for a moment. Then one of the board members cleared his throat and said, Well, it seems we have some damage control to do. I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere. I wasn't done yet. After the meeting, I drove straight to the apartment where Emily had been staying. Claire had mentioned it during one of our conversations. An apartment Colin had rented under a different name, just another secret he thought would never come to light. When I knocked on the door, I heard footsteps on the other side, followed by the sound of the lock turning. Emily opened the door, her eyes widening in surprise. She was still wearing the sweater I had bought her last Christmas, as if that detail alone could twist the knife deeper. What are you doing here? She asked, her voice shaky. I stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. The place was small, minimal, as if she hadn't had time to make it feel like home. Good. It's over, I said. Colin's done. He won't be working with me, or anyone else, ever again. The board knows everything, and the auditors will tear him apart. She sat down on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I didn't mean for this to happen, she whispered. I laughed, a bitter sound that didn't feel like mine. Yeah, you said that before. But you know what? It doesn't matter anymore. You made your choice, and now you can live with it. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. I still love you, you know. I shook my head. No, you don't. If you did, we wouldn't be here. I turned and walked out, leaving her in the empty apartment with the weight of her decisions pressing down on her. As I stepped into the cold night air, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The anger, the betrayal, the endless questions, they were still there, but they didn't consume me anymore. I had won, and now it was time to rebuild what they had tried to destroy. Only this time, I'd do it without them.